Good day, and welcome to our webcast, Are You Data Rich but Information Poor? Brought to you by CFE Media and Technology and sponsored by Manager Plus by iOffice. We're joined today by Angie Stitcher, co-founder, Chief Product Officer, and Chief Operating Officer, Ursa Leo. I'm Kevin Parker, an editor with CFE Media. Today's presentation can provide continuing education credits. CFE Media has met the standards and requirements of the Registered Continuing Education Program. Credit earned on completion of this program will be reported to RECEP at recep.net. The manufacturing world has been characterized as one that is rich in data, but lacking processes to produce meaningful information. The industrial Internet of Things adds exponentially to the volumes of data a manufacturing plant generates every day. Without a clear way to analyze this data in a reasonable time frame, manufacturers remain information poor. For example, in addressing machine maintenance challenges, subject matter experts may know what needs to be done, but unless that fix is part of the established workflow, that knowledge may be of limited value. It's time to harness the power of machine learning in conjunction with an ongoing stream of real-time data to enable predictive maintenance, workforce optimization, and other applications. Stay tuned to this webcast to learn about the possibilities. You see before you today's learning objectives. Learn why maintenance operations require contextual data. Understand an alternative for achieving contextualized data. How proprietary equipment information can be liberated, and explore emerging data standards and protocols. This event is a live educational webcast presented on July 13, 2021. The educational category is Technical, Health, and Safety. Here are some tips to help you get the most from today's webcast. If you experience issues with the slides or audio, refresh the browser or click the Refresh Media button under the presenter's picture. Control the volume of this webcast by adjusting your computer or the platform. For technical problems with the audio or slides, click on the question mark at the top right-hand corner of the screen to access a list of system checks to try before contacting an online technician. If you do need a technician, type a message in the Ask a Question box and someone will get to you as quickly as possible. The Ask a Question box is also used to ask the speaker questions. The live Q&A session will begin after the presentation concludes. Today's webcast is being recorded. You will receive an email within a week with a link to the on-demand event. To take the Learning Unit exam, use the Learning Unit exam tab option at the top of the screen. The exam will open in a separate browser. You can complete the exam after the webcast. However, the link will break when the webcast signs off. We'd now like to share with you a brief video from today's webcast sponsor, Manager Plus by iOffice. Welcome back. I'd now like to introduce today's speaker, Angie Stitcher. Angie Stitcher is the co-founder, chief product officer, and chief operating officer of Ursa Leo, an enterprise software company that enables users to visualize and interact with real-time operational data in a photorealistic 3D representation of their facility or equipment. Angie, welcome to today's webcast, and please go ahead.
Thank you, Kevin. Hi, I'm Angie Stitcher, co-founder, chief operating officer, and chief product officer of Ursa Leo. We're an immersive industrial IoT platform. I started my career in the late 90s, working first at Palm on personal digital assistants, then had a stint at Apple where I worked on computer software when the company that I worked for turned from a computer company to a phone and mobile device company. After leaving Apple, I wanted to do something that was more business to business and could have a greater impact on industrial facilities and climate change. Not only do I think that industrial IoT has the ability to reduce inefficiencies and save dollars, I think we can have a positive impact on the climate crisis. In this presentation, I'm going to go over a little bit of history and definitions of Industry 4.0, and specifically the Internet of Things. Currently, we're on our fourth industrial revolution. The first, steam, started in the late 18th century, followed by mass production in the late 19th. It wasn't until 1969, with electronics and machine-to-machine communication, did we begin to reap the benefits that led us to the fourth industrial revolution. The term Industry 4.0, or I 4.0, was first coined in 2011 by a German engineer. The Internet of Things refers to a collection of devices that are connected to the internet, commonly through a singular hub, most often in the cloud. Industry 4.0's challenge is to take all of the lessons that we've learned in the previous revolutions and apply them through cyber-physical systems. The Internet of Things is just one aspect of Industry 4.0. Others include smart sensors, a better human-to-machine interface, and cybersecurity systems. The term IoT was first coined in 1999 by an engineer at Procter & Gamble, referring to RFID. In 2021, there are 10 billion active IoT devices connected at any time. It is expected that this number will surpass 25.5 billion by the year 2030, with the global IoT spend over $15 trillion by 2025. The consumer IoT space is prolific. In the early 2000s, LG led this charge when they first announced their first smart refrigerator. In the 2010s, more and more computer, device, and appliance companies started adding sensors to their products to connect via the internet. Now, in America, nearly every home has at least one, and often more, connected IoT devices, whether they be thermostats, doorbells, security systems, smart assistants, or more. So why isn't IoT adoption in the industrial sphere just as prolific as in the consumer space? We think there are a few reasons why. First, a lot of industrial businesses have been around for a long time, some over 100 years. And the evolution of how they do things has gotten to a point where there's really no need to change. Why should we fix what isn't broken? Secondly, there may be a hesitancy to adopt new technology. If you don't understand software, then your barrier to entry is going to be higher. And you may lack the skills not only to use the software, but have someone in-house to manage and maintain and administer it. And finally, unlike in the consumer space, where the offsets of the cost are immediately felt by security or convenience, the cost offsets in the industrial sphere are less known. Industrial IoT has been around for just as long as the consumer IoT products. In the 2010s, networks evolved to be able to manage the throughput of data that were being gathered by industrial and consumer IoT systems, which led to the swell in the adoption of industrial IoT. Smart factories are estimated to be worth $500 billion by 2022. The biggest barrier to entry in industrial IoT deployments is cost of deploying. This cost can range depending on who your vendor is, what you want the software to do, and finally, how much data you expect to gather. Data collection balloons very quickly. If you think about a building that has 2,000 sensors gathering and collecting data every 10 seconds, this ends up to be about 17 gigabytes of data per day, or 6.5 terabytes per year, and well over 30 terabytes in just a few years. That's a massive amount of data. Who's looking at it? Is it being used? And is it being used to its full potential? The answer is, it's really not on either front. In 2017, Cisco did a study where they interviewed a lot of industrial businesses that had explored and adopted industrial IoT. What they found was that only a quarter of those businesses had successful deployments. 1/3 who tried and successfully got an industrial IoT deployment off the ground never considered them a success. And finally, 60% of those surveyed started the proof of concept stage and never completed it. This not only amounts to man hours lost, but dollars lost. And instead of seeing this as a negative, I see it as an opportunity for us to look at how we can change not only how we deploy industrial IoT, but most importantly, how we utilize the data and make sure we're maximizing it to get the most out of it. Now we're going to take a quick poll. What is your current level of exposure to industrial IoT? Excellent. So we see that about 68% of the users of this webinar have actually heard of IoT, with about 30% using it daily, and very few have never heard of it. So currently, there are two ways that we really go through and get IoT deployments off the ground. The first and most common is by using off-the-shelf IoT installations provided by hardware vendors such as Siemens, Honeywell, Schneider, and Bosch. The great thing about these deployments is that they're often driven by hardware companies, meaning that your hardware is supported out of the gate. Quite frequently, you already have a relationship with the vendor, and therefore the cost or barrier to entry can be low to get a project started, and they're easy to deploy. Because these are well-funded, mature companies, they're also well-supported, meaning if you have a critical failure, the service contracts that are available to you for a certain price, you can get a critical failure alert so that you can jump on issues as they occur. Some of these vendors actually do play well with others, with Siemens really leading the charge with their MindSphere platform, which allows other hardware vendors to use Siemens APIs to push their data through Siemens device management and show that data on the same dashboard as the Siemens data. Because these are widely deployed systems, they're often quite mature and feature-rich. However, there are some downsides. A lot of times, these are vendor-specific and therefore can be industry-specific. So if your business has many different types of manufacturing options or processes, you may have to have multiple vendors in one location. There's also a high overhead for administration and maintenance. Again, this points back to service contracts, and depending on the service contract you choose, that could come at a premium. And finally, because these are wide-scale deployments, there's little to no customization, meaning your workflow has to adjust and bend to the software instead of the other way around. The other option is through bespoke industrial IoT deployments. Some of these are more generic IoT deployments that are available that allow customization, not only at the device management layer, but in the solutions and features that are specific to a particular industry. There are also consulting companies that will build an IoT solution specifically for your business. The great thing about these is that they're completely customized for you, meaning you don't have to change the way you work, the software fits in, and you feel the immediate release of pain and the immediately saving of dollars by limiting downtime and even preventing injury. The downside of these, however, is that because you're paying upfront for evaluation and analyzation of your business, you have a high cost upfront, and that cost remains high throughout deployment and throughout maintenance. Because these aren't larger companies that are focused singularly on supporting you and your business, you might have inferior service and contract and support costs. There may not be an option for a critical failure alert. And finally, because the user base is not as large as some of the other larger companies with broader installations, there might be limited use, which means that platforms are going to be less mature and less feature-rich. So what do we do in Industrial IoT 2.0 to shift this? Today, we'll talk about a few things, primarily on how to maximize your IoT data through the following actions. First, we'll talk about meeting users where they are. Then we'll get into denouncing vendor specificity to limit data silos within a particular piece of hardware or facility. Not only do data silos exist within a piece of hardware, they can also exist within a team. And finally, we'll talk about the holy grail of industrial IoT, machine learning, which leads to predictive maintenance. Now we'll go through a second poll question. What stage are you in with regard to utilizing an industrial IoT system? A, no plans to use. B, planning to use in the future. C, piloting an internal proof of concept. Or D, a full-scale deployment is already in use. It looks like 25% of attendees have no plans to use industrial IoT, with 44% planning to use in the future, 20% piloting, and only 9% with a full-scale deployment in use. Meeting users where they are. So what do I mean by this? If we're integrating your existing workflow into your system from the start, that eliminates pain points and inefficiencies, downtimes, and failures almost immediately. That means you're immediately experiencing a return on your investment. If a worker has a system that they're forced to use that makes their life harder, or they don't understand why it's beneficial, they're less likely to use it and more likely to revert back to their tried and true. However, if an industrial IoT vendor understands the challenges their customer face, understands the workflows, and can see where inefficiencies lie, and builds the software to solve them, you're giving your customers an immediate return on investment, which leads the work staff to use that deployment immediately and understand how it benefits them and the business. Through graphical user interfaces that are intuitive, we're able to give users exactly what they need when they need it. We're able to eliminate a costly training program and get everyone working immediately. A good example of this is the smartphone industry. In the early 2000s, the first smartphones connected to the internet, most of them driven by personal digital assistant companies such as Palm, who took their PDAs and connected to the network through radios to build upon the functionality they already had in place. It wasn't until 2007 that smartphones really took off, and that was with the introduction of the Apple iPhone. The iPhone, and subsequently the iPad, were so intuitive that a toddler could open the device and immediately get it to do what he wanted it to do. This made Apple the most successful brand in history, and smartphones and tablets some of the most coveted and successful consumer products to date. So if we take this cue from Apple and give our users exactly what they need so that they understand the software they're using immediately and they just get it, they're much more likely to adopt it and understand it. And we're eliminating the need for costly training that can take weeks or even years. When I talk about denouncing vendor specificity, going back to what I mentioned earlier, a lot and most actually industrial IoT deployments are driven by hardware companies. Early in the formation of our business, we spoke to hardware and sales engineers to understand the challenges that B2B businesses were facing. We wanted to understand in the industrial space where the pain points lie so we could understand what software we could provide that could eliminate these issues. A common complaint was that business managers and facilities managers were frustrated because vendors were making their own IoT solutions that weren't speaking to one another. So if you had many different hardware vendors in a single space, you had many different IoT solutions. You're looking at 3 to 5 different dashboards. A lot of times, you have a single IT user who's managing all of these internally, or worse, you're paying each of these companies to manage on your behalf. If you're forced to look at 3 to 5 different dashboards to understand what's happening from machine to machine, you're not only having a silo in each platform that often don't speak the same language, but you also have gaps between these dashboards. That leaves you without the ability to look contextually and holistically at what's happening from facility to facility, or even along a single production line. So how do we overcome this vendor lockout? As I mentioned earlier, Siemens is really leading the charge as one of the larger companies really leading the charge with the MindSphere app platform. Through the use of their interfaces, they're allowing other hardware vendors to use their APIs to push data through Siemens device management and show on a singular dashboard so you can at least get a holistic view. Now, this is only dependent on whether or not the other hardware vendors you're using are actually taking advantage of this for you. One of the most common complaints with industrial IoT platforms to date is that they're really hard to understand. If we provide a simple interface that's easy to use, it's going to be easier to deploy, and it'll be in use without excessive training immediately. If we get all of these systems, regardless of their integration status, to at least speak a common language, users will be able to look from dashboard to dashboard and understand contextually what is happening from machine to machine or even facility to facility. We need to eliminate proprietary verbiage and jargon in these systems so that users can understand without having to develop their own decoder ring. Not only do silos exist between different pieces of hardware and different IIoT systems, but they can also exist within our own teams. If your subject matter expert is half a world away from your field staff or workers, or even within the same building, but they're unable to communicate, you're experiencing a silo within your own team. This can frustrate most workers and even lead to failures and injury. It wastes time and it wastes money. Using the internet and the industrial Internet of Things, we can create rich collaborations so that your entire staff, from subject matter experts to field workers and more, can collaborate in a rich experience that gives them the ability to brainstorm, problem solve, and even maintain equipment from at any time from anywhere in the world. This is going to make every member of your staff feel more empowered and going to create a more cohesive global team. And finally, the holy grail of industrial Internet of Things, machine learning. Most businesses want to use machine learning so that they can understand and use predictive maintenance. Machine learning is a type of AI that allows software applications to become more accurate without human intervention. Effectively, these machine learning algorithms learn through historical data to predict new values. Predictive maintenance refers to the act of using ML to teach the algorithm what has happened in the past so that you can avoid failures in the future. If your IoT data is part of your everyday life cycle, your data is going to start out well managed and well integrated. This is a great start for using machine learning. Now we'll go to poll question 3. What is your level of knowledge on machine learning? A, never heard of it. B, I know a little and want to know more. C, I'm well acquainted but haven't used it. And D, I'm well acquainted and use it in my business. 55% have responded B, I know a little and want to know more. Very few, at 3%, have never heard of machine learning. And nearly 30% are well acquainted but haven't used it. Interestingly, only 3% are well acquainted and use it. While starting out, getting your data better managed and better utilized is great for using machine learning, one of the biggest barriers to entry is that a lot of businesses have been accumulating data for many, many years, and that data is quite dirty. So what do we mean by that? What that means is that the data is not normalized, meaning that a piece of equipment may have changed the way that it has started reporting over a period of time, which effectively renders all that historical information useless. Once a system starts reporting data, it needs to remain consistent in order for the algorithms to work. You may also need to tag your data, which is basically giving it a label to let it know you're training the algorithm. You're letting the algorithm know what information is bad and what information is good. And this can be sensor data, a text file, or even a video. And then finally, if you have those disparate systems still in place, you're going to need to make sure they're back to speaking that same language. So you'll need to clean those up to make sure all of that information is properly formatted and being utilized. And then finally, even if you have all the same equipment in place and it's clean and normalized and tagged, you may have it deployed in different ways in different locations. A machine at facility A may be reporting max hot, where a machine at facility B may be reporting max cold. So you'll need to understand and train the algorithm to really learn the difference between these two values. If we start with implementing a policy of data standardization, when your project starts, you're going to be able to use data much more effectively and get the most out of IIoT, machine learning, and predictive maintenance. I believe that my tenure in the consumer space and then pulling that information into the industrial space, marrying these two, is going to make industrial IoT just as effective and just as prolific as consumer IoT is, which will pave the way for making Industry 4.0 a complete success and also set us up for what Industry 5 will bring. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Angie, so much. It's an interesting topic, and people can approach it from different directions. I think the fact that we've held our audience through the full half hour shows that the level of focus that you brought to it was of considerable interest to them. Type your questions for Angie in the Ask a Question box on your screen. We'll get to as many as time allows. Questions that we don't get to today will be posted online with the archived version of this webcast. Remember to download a certificate of completion and a copy of the presentation using the Event Resources tab. Angie, I'd like to talk about maybe some areas that are of considerable interest to you when it comes to IIoT. And I know that the company you're with is talking about photorealistic representations as a user interface. How does that interact with IIoT? What's the point where those two come together?
It goes back to meeting users where they are. So if you're looking at a piece of equipment, a digital representation of it that is photorealistic to the actual piece of equipment within the facility, you immediately have an understanding of what you're looking at. Then we're able to take all of the IoT data streams and port those onto the digital model. So you're seeing how those values are reactive in real time. You can also, because we're recording these values, you can also rewind and replay certain values so you can see, what led up to an event, all the contextual information on that machinery, real time to understand what happened so that you can prevent that issue from happening in the future.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly interesting the way that geography can be used as an interface that allows you to drill down to detailed information in terms of, say it was a pump's history or a pump's current use or what the plan of production is, like across the entire range of cognitive engineering, if you will. And the digital twin, in a way, is the epitome of that because it's a model of the thing itself, and so you have
exactly.
really intuitive ways of reacting with it. What are the biggest challenges, though, that you encounter in using photorealistic 3D representations as an interface? Is it the standards by which those representations are derived? Is it the use that they're put to? How to make the switch between the two? Can you give us any kind of insight or feedback into how realistic it is to be using photorealistic representations in the near term?
Sure. I think most businesses, if they have the ability to have either models or CADs of equipment, we're able to really quickly create a digital twin of that. And what I mean by digital twin is really a digital representation that looks exactly like the piece of machinery that you're dealing with. One of the biggest challenges, though, is if something changes on that equipment, we need to be able to make sure the model is updated. So one of the things that we need to do as an industry is not only pull these CADs and figures to create, but also figure out a way to make sure that they're staying up to date with what's happening on the ground. A lot of times, anecdotally, we spoke to a large industrial vendor or industrial business, and one of the biggest challenges for them is that they put lines up and take lines down all the time. So if you're taking lines down and putting a new one up, how are you creating a new twin to represent what's currently in play? So I think we can solve all of these problems with software. making sure that the throughput of data is there so that the model actually sees that a change has occurred, or the user tells the model that a change has occurred.
It's interesting because our poll questions today, we were talking about IIoT, and we got about the kind of response that we were expecting, that most of the people who are familiar with the plant engineering and control engineering brand know something about machine learning and artificial intelligence or IIoT or Industry 4.0, but don't consider themselves to be experts at it because the technologies haven't really suffused through the entire installed base. And it wasn't that many years ago that we were asking the same things about the transition from 2D CAD to 3D CAD. And that's a transition that's gotten much further. But I guess my question to you is, in working with your client base, are they already expected to be masters of 3D CAD and have gone beyond 2D CAD and venturing into more dense technologies, if you will?
Excellent question. Some are, most are not. So we can use various different resources to pull information in to create a digital twin. We use LiDAR scans. We can use photos and measurements. We can take a 2D model. We recently had a construction company that had a 2D model that we were able to create a 3D twin out of by pulling it into our software and making it 3D. So we can take various different types of processes to get around the customer's lack of ability to provide a CAD model.
Good. So we talked about kind of the input end of it in terms of CAD and such. In terms of the output part of it, and you talked about the machine learning or AI as kind of being the eventual goal. Talk about partnering with a machine learning company in terms of how engineers should prepare themselves for that stage when they start to, as subject matter experts, interact with data scientists. Are there any tricks of the trade that you could share with us in that regard?
Yeah, I'm actually gonna, if we could show that slide, this slide, yeah. So for machine learning, really it's gonna be as good as your data is. There are companies that charge a premium to clean up data. A lot of businesses that have been accumulating data over time haven't really understood that, as they change the way that data reports or even moves across a particular facility, they may be impeding their ability to use predictive analysis in the future that doesn't involve a human. So I think before getting into predictive maintenance and machine learning is really making sure that you understand that data lake that you have and just what's inside of it. There are terabytes and terabytes of data there. How much of it is useful? Has there been a change in the way that a reporting has happened? We recently talked to a company that the same piece of equipment in many different locations reports in a different format. So they're unable to really put machine learning in place over the entire fleet. It has to be machine by machine.
Yeah, I could see where that would probably be a major constraint to any broad program to enact machine learning. What kind of other advice would you have for those who are starting to dip their toe in the waters when it comes to analytics? Now, you're talking already about how data engineering has to precede data science. What is it? What are some of the things that you can do or others can do to help companies get past that fairly substantial challenge of getting their data in line so it can be analyzed?
Yeah, well, my business, we actually spend a lot of time on a data translation service that takes data from multiple resources and normalizes it to put it into the system so that the customer is kind of taken out of that loop to have to clean up that data. So the data translation service, as it pulls the data into the IoT system, is cleaning it up and normalizing it so that equipment A and equipment B, if it's the same type of equipment, are speaking that same language. So software can pretty much do a lot of that heavy lifting. It's just a matter of putting it in place.
Good. So
one excellent question as a follow-on to that, question 12 is with regard to security. Security is often a concern, especially for larger businesses that have critical data. So IoT deployments don't have to live on the cloud. They can be on-prem. It's just that you'll have to have someone on staff who's going to be able to manage that server so that all of that data is contained. There are protocols that you can use if you want to use a cloud-based solution. A lot of the cloud vendors do provide more, even more in that area, and it's certainly as we evolve in industrial IoT, security is the top concern. So security is available. It's just a matter of how you get it deployed.
Good. Continuing kind of with the machine learning abstract, if you will, you've got your data secure, you've got it normalized. The next step would be looking for anomalies or looking for what your data was actually telling you. Can you talk about that process a little bit?
Yeah, a lot of times businesses are already aware of, a point in time when a failure occurred, a line went offline, a machine failed. So going back to that timeline and looking at the data that was pulled in and tagging it, that's what I meant by labeling it. So if you can go back to those timelines and just quickly label, when this sound started occurring and this sound measurement went to this degree, that's when things started to go off the rails. Then you're basically training that algorithm to learn that that's a bad thing. So then the next time after the algorithm's in place, the next time that machine hits that octave, you get a notification so that you can go and investigate to understand if this is really trending towards a failure or if it's just a small tweak that you need to make. But it's really an active experience in training the algorithm because only you know your business.
Good. Now, one of the reasons why data scientists' capabilities are relatively rare in the manufacturing industries is because there's such high demand in other industries, banking, finance, perhaps healthcare, and some others. Does the fact that you're engaged in the business that you're engaged in today testify to the fact that you think the manufacturing industries are ready to take the next step into engaging, first of all, at the edge with sensors, and then collecting that data for connectivity, and then finally analyzing it using statistical methods or machine learning or others?
What we found is either end of the spectrum. We've found a lot of larger businesses have IoT deployments already out there, but they're really frustrated because they don't feel like they're getting the most out of them. And the other end is, other large-scale businesses who are really interested in industrial IoT and just don't know how to get started. So it really kind of runs the gamut of, they're interested, but they don't know how to get started versus they've got something, but it's not really working out to its full potential. Again, going back to the fact that, a third of all industrial IoT deployments were never considered successful. And we've definitely seen that in working and talking to different customers, especially large to medium scale manufacturing facilities.
Good. And when you look across the range of production industries, whether they be discrete industries, where they're making cars, or process industries, where it might be refining or some other kind of chemical, which industries within those do you find the most interest or demand for these advanced applications?
It's been fairly interesting, but not that surprising to find that the energy sector has been some of the most common that want to get involved. Governments are really pushing for the energy sector to do better, to eliminate off-gassing of oil and gas refineries, to make sure that power grids are operating at their full potential and failures and issues are known before they, create devastating wildfires, let's say. So we've definitely found that the energy sector has been the most active. Surprisingly, construction and building management has really bubbled up to the top as well, with manufacturing close behind.
Good. A question from one of our listeners. From my experience with the software hardware utilized in my plant, which is largely Rockwell or Allen Bradley, there are limited opportunities to implement IIoT due to the current structure. To what extent do you expect older manufacturing systems to integrate IIoT into their installed base?
I think that depends largely on what's already available. So if your hardware is already connected, there are a lot of options. I go back to some of the more customizable options where if you've already got something available within your facility, you already have sensors, they're already connected, they're already reporting, then you can use some of these more generic or off-brand solutions. Off-brand sounds negative, but bespoke solutions to really get them to come in, take all the data you're already mining, and pull an industrial IoT solution together for you. It's going to be a little bit more difficult in that structure to go to some of the larger vendors who do the off-the-shelf stuff. So there are a lot of options available. We found, well, actually early in our business, our goal was to create a more generic industrial IoT platform. And what we found is that it was kind of a Me Too product because there were so many options available in the marketplace. So there are a lot of options there. It's just a matter of finding the one that best suits your business and aligns with what you've already got in place.
Yeah, I would say that, I don't know about the analytics, but certainly at the sensor end of it, or if you call it the edge, I think that there's a lot of opportunities for brownfield implementations. And in fact, if it wasn't for the brownfield implementations, there would be a lot more struggle to introduce these technologies than there already is. So, I think then just forging connectivity across a lot of different inputs and outputs has been where the manufacturing industry has been able to do well just because of some of the technologies for that. What gets you most excited? This is really, we're heading into our final question here now. And I guess, excuse me, what I'm interested in, Angie, is knowing kind of what you're excited about going forward and where do you think the role for your company will be as IIoT emerges as something that's not just known by 60 or 70% of the engineering community, but actually used by 60 to 70%.
Sure. I'm actually excited to put all of the things I talked about in this presentation into play. It's really one of the largest charges of our business to make things accessible. Accessibility is really the key to making sure deployments are successful. If the staff from the CEO to the field staff workers don't really understand what's happening or why they're using a piece of software, there's going to be less adoption, which, you've wasted a lot of time and money, and you're spending a lot of money on training programs that aren't going to get utilized. Intuitive user interfaces that eliminate the burden of training, so you're not having to do ongoing training. And the benefit of having a rich collaboration experience. So you're connecting via the internet, sharing screens, using augmented reality or virtual reality to understand how a piece of machinery works, and really sharing real time and asking questions in training programs and being able to look at the actual system. We think that's going to go a long way to improving communications throughout a global workforce and then improving efficiencies overall.
Well, thanks, Angie. It's really about how we work now, and that's something that we can all be more expert in as we continue implementing our careers, if you will. But in any case, thank you very much. Appreciate it. I'd like to thank our audience for the great questions. I'd also like to extend special thanks to our sponsor, Manageable Plus by iOffice, for sponsoring today's event. Now that we're just about done, we want to hear how we did. The exit survey will pop up on your screen as soon as the webcast ends. Please take a moment to complete it because we use this information to improve our webcast. Finally, on behalf of Plant Engineering, I'd like to thank you for attending. That concludes our webcast. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.